Let me.
Do they hear us?
Okay, let us start. Oh, better
Larissa, can you hear us?
Yes, yes, we now can.
Let's- Let's continue with our look. Okay. Okay. Yes, one moment. One moment. As you remember, we discussed Jesus meeting with a ruler. Actually, not just a meeting, but a ruler who approached him on his way to Jerusalem. And then what issued? So we discussed this thing. After that comes right away his address to the disciples. Let us repeat it. Mary, it is 18:31-34.
And taking the 12 aside, he said to them, Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and everything that is written of the Son of Man by the prophets will be accomplished. For he will be delivered to the Gentiles, and will be mocked, and shamefully treated and spit upon. They will scourge him and kill him, and on the third day he will rise. But they understood none of these things. This saying was hid from them, and they did not grasp what was said.
So as we remember, it is a third prediction or explanation. What is going to happen in Jerusalem for him? So it is all three things are repeated in three synoptic gospels. So it is important for them that to record that Jesus described that to his disciples, maybe to calm down their expectations. You know, we know that their expectations were not realistic, and they continue to be not realistic. Even when we'll come to the scene of his entrance to Jerusalem, it was exuberant acceptance of the Messiah as a, as a fulfillment of their expectations of him. So, and it is emphasized here that even the third time, his disciples did not understand his words. They understood none of these things, none. This thing was hid from them, and they did not grasp what was said. And what they didn't understand his humiliation and complete surrender on the one hand, because many times, so to say, they escaped the persecutors together with him. So they expected it. And then his words about his being killed, martyred, and his risen, his resurrection. You know, we have to understand these things because it was clearly emphasized. So the idea of some kind of a liberal investigators of the scripture to say that there's none of this in the scriptures, that all the kind of resurrection stories appeared later on, already an established church, has no ground in in the gospel itself. No ground. And as we will see in the stories of the resurrection, it taken them all in surprise. They didn't expect it. So it is clear said in the gospel. So for us, it's clear, but not for everybody. Not for everybody. Okay, let's start from here. So if we want to say anything about it, or just comment or ask any questions, we can do it, and then we can go on, because at that point the scene changes, and they're entering the Jericho. But before we enter into the new scene, let's kind of wrap up with previous discussions.
Father Michael, I only have one objection to what you said.
Good.
That you call their expectations not realistic. Because how can you be realistic about things that have such an internal controversy within them? That on the one hand, they should expect much less than they do because they're excited and exalted too much, and they want the Messiah to fix things, etc. But on the other hand, they expect too little because the resurrection is prophesied here too. It's not just his humiliation, passions, and death, but his resurrection as well. So it's very difficult to make sense out of it, especially in view of what we discussed last time, namely that who is the Son of Man? Every time this expression is used, it introduces its own controversy. He says it point blank, and yet it's unfathomable that he is the one about whom it was written through the prophets. So, but he never says I. He always says the Son of Man, or in Hebrew, Son of Man in general. It's not even the article is not possible, but it doesn't necessarily indicate a proper noun. It may be any Son of Man. So he speaks very strongly, but with a lot of inner controversy. So what you said about realism, I think doesn't apply here at all. Otherwise, it's a pretty accurate thing. But I wonder if I were there, I would have understood what's being said. So I would like to come back for a second to my previous point, namely, we shouldn't think that we are much smarter than they are, because it's much easier to be smart in retrospect, as we know, than when you hear such things. And I think it's important to dwell on the internal controversy of this prediction.
Thank you. I agree completely. Neither, I'm not thinking myself smarter than the 12. And first of all, I'm not sure that I will be in the number of 12 to begin with. But anyway, even from,
I'm speaking strictly from the point of view of the construction of this.
I understand. Perfect, understand. You're right. Any other comments before we go on? So, all right, it's settled, let's say, that they didn't understand anything. Now, what we have now, the next story is right there. It's in Jericho. Approaching Jericho, and then what happened in Jericho? Mary, Luke 18, 35, 43, if you do it for us.
As he drew near to Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the roadside begging. And hearing a multitude going by, he inquired what this meant. They told him, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. And he cried, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And those who were in front rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stopped and commanded him to be brought to him. And when he came near, he asked him, "What do you want me to do for you?" He said, "Lord, let me receive my sight." And Jesus said to him, "Receive your sight. Your faith has made you well." And immediately he received his sight and followed him, glorifying God. And all the people, when they saw it, gave praise to God.
Okay. Now that's the importance of Jericho. Let's first of all talk about it. That's a border town, actually, the old fortress. Very symbolic in the history of the Promised Land, because the Jews had to go, first of all, to take it in order to enter. They had to take this fortress, which was considered, invincible, in order to enter the land of promise. So they went from this side, as we remember. We also remember that Jericho, there was no battle about Jericho. The surrender of Jericho was actually miraculous by itself, as it is described. So there were priests who went around it 7 times, blowing the trumpets. And after they finished their 7th round, walls fell down. And obviously they finished the city and so on and so forth. It was kind of... now, it's interesting also that according to recent excavations, it turned out that Jericho is one of the most ancient town, on the earth, or maybe the most. They went down to the levels of the ninth millennia before Jesus Christ. Could you imagine this? So it's a very ancient thing. It's symbolic. It's symbolic place to begin with. Then you enter and go to the land of promise. In this case, Jews repeat this entrance as it is described, particularly in Luke, because Luke emphasizes, all synoptics says that he goes to Jerusalem in order to, but Luke emphasizes that from, he prepares his readers that it's all taking place on his road to Jerusalem. So the Son of Man repeats the entrance of the people of God, but in different ways. It's not destructive in any way. It's not destructive in any way. So it is a messianic way, because the giving sight to the blind was considered to be a sign of the Messiah. Now, it's interesting that whereas all three synoptics speak about this entrance, Mark gives us his name even, which is significant. Mark. And as they came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples, and great multitude, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus. Bartimaeus means son of Timaeus, actually, was writing by the roadside. It's interesting that in Mark, it's after they left Jericho. But I'll tell you why this little details are important. Because if we go to Matthew will describe 2 blind beggars. Look, as they went out of Jericho, I don't know, a great crowd followed him. And behold, 2 blind men sitting by the roadside, when they heard that Jesus was passing by, cried out, have mercy on us, son of David. The crowd rebuked them, telling them to be silent. But they cried out the more, Lord, have mercy on us, son of David. And Jesus stopped and called them, saying, what do you want me to do for you? They said to him, Lord, let our eyes be open. And Jesus in pity touched their eyes, and immediately they received their sight and followed him. Now, some may say that it's not major point. Why Matthew mentioned two beggars, blind beggars, and Timaeus and Luke only one? This first point of disagreement between them. On the other hand, for Luke, it's on the way to Jericho, whereas for them, it's out of Jericho. So how you would kind of wrap up this, let's say, resolve this, let's say, contradiction and
I
discussion?
have a suggestion.
Okay.
Luke was not a Jew and Matthew was. So to him, it is very important that two makes a witness.
Right.
And this is one point. The other point is that Jericho was on the way from Galilee. So it's on the way. That's the point. It's not necessarily clear whether Luke, of course, knew it through a mediated testimony, but that's not even the point. The point is that to him, the main thing was that it was on the way from Galilee to Jerusalem. But to Matthew, it is important that it's well, more or less the same thing. In other words, it's kind of a turning spot, and for one it's before, and for the other it's after the turning spot. But the difference between the one blind man and the two is largely because of the Mosaic law. So Matthew would find it symbolic that there were two, because it's in Luke it's more of a personal recognition, which is very interesting because it's right before the disciples are mentioned as like not understanding what they hear. In other words, they have eyes, but they seem to be blind. So it's important. The similarity is that it's one blind man, that the witness is blind, but that the witness is two witnesses would be more important for Matthew. But for Luke, the personal recognition, personal encounter would be in opposition to, like, the other side of the opposition between the blindness, kind of the inner blindness of the disciples and the instant recognition of this stranger but sufferer. So they just kind of make slightly different points there, but the personal does not preclude, of course, two witnesses. But I think that the fact that they were two is like, you cannot refute it for Matthew.
Okay, anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I just have a point of, my point is like from the other side about the Bible in general, which, and people talk about how historically valid are the Gospels, how true are these stories. What makes them true and human is that they're so human, is that two different people will remember an event that they were at, and they will have slight discrepancies in the minute little facts. And that to me is what makes it real. Because if I tell you, I was at a party with you in college 40 years ago, and Tom was there also. And you'll say, no, Tom wasn't there. Tom was, he was at the other party, It makes it real. That's the way we remember. And we remember the important things, but the little things, we get a little, and it's like if the Quran is like perfectly written. It's like someone sat down and wrote this perfect story where everything aligns perfectly. That to me, it's an invention. it's a literary invention. But if you have this kind of sloppiness with the little events, the little things, where there 10 people, well, we had what? We had borscht? No, we had chicken soup, you know? That to me is what makes it real.
Yeah,
So-
I fully agree, Peter. You know that there is this saying in Russian, he lies like an eyewitness, врет как очевидец.
Yeah.
And I find this, you know, we usually consider it to be ironic about eyewitnesses, but I think it tells us something about the true witness, because only eyewitnesses are capable with coming up with such diverse detail. So, but this expression is not necessarily just sarcastic, but it also could be revealing something about the nature of eyewitness. Yes, we begin to lie in detail.
Thank you, Peter. Let me pour some kind of a water on your meal. Let's take Mark's account. And as they came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a great multitude, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside. Now, it's interesting that Mark repeats the same word, the name of Bartimaeus, and then explains it. It's the son of Timaeus. In Russian, we say Timeich. Bar, it's an Aramaic son, and Timeich. So that's it's patronymic. Patronymic. This man, as a beggar, was remembered by his patronymic, not even by his personal name, by his patronymic. He was a beggar, but probably the beggar was some kind of a character, you know, outspoken one. And that's what they actually explained. He was crying out, you know, through the, you know, imagine the scene, you know, some kind of beggar sitting here, and a big crowd comes, you know, listening, trying to touch, you know, this prophet, whatever, this healer, this teacher, this rabbi, and an insignificant beggar sitting here. But he is shouting, he's crying out. He's crying out so much that actually, you know, the people started to calm him down before Jesus actually called him. Now, obviously, Peter just mentioned 40 years ago, we've been, look, there's a records someplace probably of this episode remained. And synoptics who wrote later used them, some of them. And in these records, this man was actually mentioned by his name. But it is perfectly possible that he was sitting with some another beggar. You know, they sit together, who is much meeker, who is not kind of expressing himself so strongly, so to say. So he kind of, this Bartimaeus, this Timeich, led him to this kind, he kind of a driving character in this sense.
Father Michael.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, yes, I'm going into fiction. Yes, I'm going into fiction, but
No, don't get carried away, because I have an equally carried away reading of the meaning of the name.
Okay, go ahead.
All of the etymologists suggest that it is that Timaeus in Greek means the one honoring God. However, even in Greek, it would be an aberration, because the full name would be Timotheos. So it is possible that it was a misreading, especially because the first half of it is Aramaic. Timaeus is a very valid possible aberration of a Hebrew name as well, not only of a Greek one, because for the Greek it's also an aberration, and that would be Theom, which means the same as Thomas. And in that case, that means that he's the son of twins. So his name suggests that, but not the son, belonging, because in Aramaic it could mean anybody belonging. to the company of twins. In that case, it kind of obliquely suggests another misunderstanding. Luke would hear it through the Greek, although bar is an Aramaic particle, but it may mean that he was one of the two to begin with. That's how he was referred to. So that would be a mishearing. Everybody translates Timaeus from any dictionary as son of the one honoring God. But they all, when they give you etymology, they all essentially give you the etymology for Timotheos and not for Timaeus, which I find to be very interesting, because if it's a mishearing, it would suggest that Luke understood it to the degree of his awareness of the Greek. While it's very uncommon to have a mixed name like that, even for the Gospels.
But Luke doesn't, you remember, Luke does not mention his name at all. It's just a beggar. It's only Mark that actually.
Exactly, because you have all sorts of rumors, all sorts of hearsay, rumors are sluhi, people hear it. They want to convey it as best they can. So what they register is what they understand. And what they understand is that people would refer to this person as he's one of the twins, but they would register it. But if they know only Greek, they would immediately interpret it as there was only one. And that was his name, his proper name. Because whenever we don't understand the word, we assume it's a proper name. It's just, again, in our human nature, and it fully agrees with what Peter said, that when you're an eyewitness, it's like the Rashomon effect. You describe only what you witnessed, what you noticed. So that may be even farther carried away. But I think I would feel safer with this kind of getting carried away, because it's typical for people reading names that way, than with the psychological one.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions about it? Or it's we
No, I also have a point that Jesus always asks. He says, what is it? What is it that you want? Well, you mean he doesn't know what they want? Isn't it obvious that they're blind, they want to be healed? But Jesus always asks people he heals what they want him to do. And of course he knows what they want him to do. Why does he ask them? I think he wants us to ask. He wants us to participate in the healing. He wants us to partner with God, and we partner with God when we ask him for it. Of course, he knows what that we want to be healed, obviously. He doesn't, he's not really asking. It's like he doesn't know what the blind man wants. I mean, even if he were in Jesus, if he were just some doctor, obviously he would know that the guy wants to be healed, but I think he just, God wants us to ask him and to participate in our own healing.
I think it's absolutely true. And I have very immediate experience of it myself, because there's one thing that you encounter when you have a good cognitive psychotherapist. The first thing they ask you when you come to them, when they're good, when they pay attention to you, they ask you, what do you want? What is your goal? Why are you here? And it's really important for us to formulate it, because that's when we enter the relationship with the person we came for help to. So they usually call it, какой ваш запрос? So what is your request? They have a very formal notion of it. You may redefine it. I may redefine it when I come to them, because I discover that what I want is not necessarily how I see it. But this is a very necessary question to return, to give us back our agency with what's happening with us. So that's already part of the healing when he asks that question. And in his case, you're right, it's especially striking because he would know but he would know. It's like I tell my students, the fact that I know all 6 Russian cases does not mean that that I can spoon feed them to you unless you memorize them. So in a way, it's you have to take over when you come with this initiative. And I find this quite fascinating when he asked this question. You're right, he asked it very, very often.
Okay. Anyone else want to say something about it?
I just remember an episode in C.S. Lewis's, again, I keep remembering the Chronicles of
The
Narnia.
Gospel of C.S. Lewis.
I don't quite remember the situation, but the children say, maybe we should ask Aslan. And one of them says, but Aslan knows everything. He knows what we need. He says, yes, but he likes to be asked.
Okay. Okay. So, all right. But also, we have to, let's say, also take into consideration Matthew's point that they both, or one at least, one and Luke, but they both are witnesses of the messianship, because it was clear for contemporaries of Jesus that to give the sight to a blind is a sign of the Messiah. And actually, in big details, it's described in the 9th chapter of John about the man who was born blind, because he was taken to Inquisition 2 times. Inquisition of Pharisees. They wanted to know whether he was born blind, and they even called for his parents, because it was absolutely, it was very significant point whether to accept Jesus or not, whether he's true Messiah or not. That's what they ask him. Actually, in the next chapter, in the 11th chapter of John, they say, how long you're going to keep, they surrounded him in the temple. They say, how long are you going to keep our soul in suspense? So to say, we don't know what to expect. Are you Messiah or not? Are you the one? So they try and they cannot. They try and it doesn't fit in their expectation of the Messiah. But nevertheless, they were attracted to him precisely because of this healing of this blind man. And
I think here it's pretty clear, because they call him the son of David. Talk about patronymics.
Yes. And even in John's case, in John's rendering of the different situation, there was a split. It says it's a schism, in this Inquisition council. They said, look, this man does not observe Sabbath. He healed him on Sabbath, as I said, but if he's not from God, how could he did such a sign? So actually, among inquisitors, there was a schism because of this thing, because they realized that the sign is clearly of the messianic nature. On the other hand, they did not want to accept it, because that will issue that they accept Jesus, in fullness, whatever he said. So therefore, this particular episode in Luke, and he puts it right at the entrance of Jericho. So it is the entrance to Jericho, enter the Messiah. So in the eyes of the people, they are following the Messiah to Jerusalem. And it is also in the mind of his disciples, who just heard his third prediction of his passion and resurrection. So it is done also before their own eyes. And this one blind man or two blind men, they're following them. also in the same ground. So you see, in this scene is a scene of the entrance of the Messiah into Jericho. Now let's continue with what happens in Jericho, because it is the next scene we find only in Luke. And it is the story that we read several times, obviously, during the year, because it is an important one. And so it falls on Sundays. And it is Zacchaeus, very known to us. But nevertheless, we read it and we'll discuss it in this context. That's 19:110.
He entered Jericho and was passing through. And there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and rich. And he sought to see who Jesus was, but could not on account of the crowd, because he was small of stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he made haste and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all murmured, he has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save that which was lost.
Okay. Now, observations on this episode, which we find only in Luke again. That's a unique thing. What happened in Jericho itself, according to him?
Well,
So,
I'm ready to start, but you know
go ahead,
that this is a scene in which I put a lot at stake. On which I put a lot at stake. There's a lot of irony here, tons of irony, because Jesus, of course, knows he's a sinner because he reclaims him by the end of the passage. But even if you don't know the meaning of his name, it's really important that Jesus calls him by his name. He recognizes it. And this calling him by the name is also symbolic because of the meaning of the name, because Zakai in Hebrew means worthy. So everybody knows he's not worthy. He is a short, he is not respected, he's a publican, he is all sorts of things people in the nation despise and even mock because of his shortness and his kind of caricature-like picture of climbing trees. So he forgets about his dignity, which is a related root in Hebrew to being worthy, obviously. When he forgets all about the way he looks when he climbs a tree. So on his end, he doesn't look worthy or dignified, socially speaking. But when Jesus says, you worthy one, get down off the tree, it sounds doubly ironic because dignitaries and worthy people don't do it. So he already behaves not the way, you do according to your statute when you collect taxes or represent the state or something of the sort. He already forgets himself and his statute all the way. But the irony is very strong because if you're worthy, then climb down the tree. It sounds like Jesus's full awareness of this worthiness being only potential, not actual. But there is another thing there, a little bit later. So essentially, he not only vouchsafes him the resurrection, the reclamation of the meaning of his name, but he tells him how. I am going to honor your house by visiting it right now. So the discrepancy is even stronger. But what's even more interesting is that these words climb down the tree. The worthy one climbed down the tree is a foretelling of the way he himself is going to be mocked on the cross. So the fact that they're passing Jerusalem, on the way to Jerusalem here, kind of allows this irony to be turned once more as another prophecy about Christ. If you are worthy, climb down the tree. So it is possible.
Yes,
It is
it's
possible to flip these things up and down all the time. And Zacchaeus, therefore, becomes a doubly symbolic figure. On the one hand, it's about his own penitence, his own reclamation as a son of Abraham. But on the other hand, it's also symbolic for those who are listening. So Jesus is not only addressing him personally, but he uses him to address his disciples personally, to dwell again on this necessary contrast between extreme humiliation and his own glory and worth, his own worthiness of being the son of David, being the son of God.
Thank you. Thank you. By the way, it's a very interesting point made that, yeah, that will be, completely overturned in the Jesus' own situation when he was on the cross, and the high priest said, if he is really Son of God, let him come down from the tree, and we'll then recognize him that he is worthy. So actually, in some way, Zacchaeus kind of anticipates.
And it in no way minimizes his own story, his own kind of restoration to honor and through penitence, through complete repentance. So it doesn't stop being personal by becoming so symbolic. And that is what I find to be absolutely breathtaking about the Gospels in general.
Yeah, it's, let's say, very realistic psychological description of the situation of this, of the small statutes publican, who was a head of, publicans in this Jericho, because he probably heard about Jesus, that Jesus, made companies with tax collectors. So he's not kind of staying away from them. So, and he wanted to look at this man. He didn't expect anything, just to look at him. That's all. Just to look at this man, and it was not even easy to. Where did you find Jesus? He didn't have his office hours. He was passing by with his disciples here and there, all over the country. So, and then he was just passing by. So it's impossible to see him. He just wanted to see him. He didn't expect anything. That's it, and it's also an important point, obviously, of this personal recognition.
But I think that I would like to dwell for one more second on the irony of calling him by the name. That people's nicknames sometimes are given to them ironically. Like you would have a huge brigand whose name would be huge in size, whose name would be Little Bill, or Billy the Shorty when he's extremely tall, or calling someone very fat, skinny, or vice versa, etc. So this is a common way of giving names, and that's the way initially everybody hears it. They call him by his name because he's anything but worthy. There doesn't seem to be any dignity left to him at all. If before he was just despised by the people, then now it's like exposing this by calling him by this name, because nobody finds him to be worthy. And suddenly he really becomes that, because the continuation of this sentence is, I am going to visit you today. So, so it's he's suddenly kind of, it's like flipping the irony once again to make it mean what it really says, but nobody expects it to mean it anymore.
But it's also, like a little last judgment, because, when he came down from the tree, people start to kind of murmur, not even murmurs. It's just, he's gone to the guess of man who is a sinner. And what Zacchaeus said all of a sudden, he's a money man, he said, and he said to the Lord, behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. Half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. He will become beggar himself. If everybody's told, you remember what you did, you remember what you said. So actually, in this moment, it's a complete penitence from his part, monetary wise. Half of what I have, I'll give it. So it's complete conversion. The man changed it, decided, we don't know what will happen later, but in this very moment, he decided to completely change his life. It is also a very significant thing here. So it is also symbolic in a way, because Jesus' recognition of a sinner turned a one to a penitent right away. So, and it happens here, kind of. Yes, Larissa, yes, go.
But it's not just recognition, it's giving him credit ahead of time. He
Okay,
calls
yeah.
him by the name he no longer deserves. The name means axios.
Yes.
And it's something that I'm constantly reminded of whenever we have an ordination or something of the sort. That it's whenever we say that, it's kind of against expectations, and not because of them. And also being a priest's wife for nearly 44 years, I can testify to that. But it's interesting that it's possible to do it. It is possible for such a person to become worthy through Jesus' grace.
Okay, Larissa, you wanted to say something.
The story ends with the words, the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. So there is this word save. In the Russian translation of the story about Bartimaeus, the blind Bartimaeus, Jesus says to him, your faith saved you. So there is these two stories of salvation, one after the other. And I'm wondering whether it's the same word there in Greek.
Wait a second. Yes. Soseto Apollos. Yes, to save what is lost. It is in case of Zacchaeus. And let us say, yes.
Verse 40.
Your face has made you well. Wait a second. Receive your sight, your face. Let me find it. Wait. Sesoken, see, yes. Or pistis su sesoken. Yes, so say sesoken. Yes, exactly the same. It's just it is imperfect. Yeah, saved you. So your face saved you. It's the same word. One is in infinitives, to say. Another is in perfect.
So there is a physical salvation, physical and spiritual, so to speak.
Yes, that's you're right. That's very good. Yes, that's good observation. Yes, that's right. So there were two, actually. So they became, even in Luke, they became two witnesses. so in two witnesses what happened in Jericho on the way to Jerusalem. Anyway, anyone who wants to add something here, please, let's do it. any comments, any observations, any questions around this issue? Because we won't go any further. There will be a long parable later. And this parable will have parallel in other synoptics with some differences, and we will not be able to discuss it in 8 minutes that we have.
Well, in that case, I would like to come back to the problem of in verse 10 of him calling himself the Son of Man.
Okay,
Because by the context, it becomes clear that he's speaking about himself because of the function. But if you imagine that it said, for a Son of Man came to find and save the lost, in that case, a Son of Man, then it would mean that he is describing to them, revealing to them who the Messiah is. The Messiah is the one who, a Son of Man, a human being, comes to find and save the lost. So he begins to kind of respond to his being confessed by the blind man or the blind man. By implication, he suggests that it's himself, but he describes himself by his function as the Messiah here. Because the Messiah is a Son of Man who came to find and save the lost. A very important Jewish messianic expectation of salvation is described actually not with the root of Yeshua, but with Geula, which means essentially reclamation. It means kind of being saved by the bell, saved by grace, saved, vouchsafed, scooped out of perdition. And it seems that in Greek, it's definitely the same word, and the echo must be kept in the Greek. But here he's also trying to explain to them how come he's a Messiah without defining himself as such. So he slightly reveals this weird expression, Son of Man, the meaning of it, or the function rather, not the meaning.
anyone else wants to say? Does anyone else wants to say?
If I'm allowed to run a little bit ahead, it's interesting that in the previous parable in Luke, we have a shorty. And here we have a dignified person. A person in verse 12 who would be defined as dignified, but that's slightly running ahead because I'm really interested how those parables are all connected.
Okay.
And by contrast.
So if anyone else want to say something, please go ahead. Well, in this case, we'll just adjourn for today. Thank you very much. And then we will go to the parable, big parable. Interesting in Luke, by the way, because it's somehow different from others, from synoptics. And then there will be entrance to Jerusalem. So we'll do it next time. Thank you very much. God bless you all. Hope to see you.